Hi, I'm Noel from Boxtail Soup, and this is the second part of our puppet making tutorial where we're making a very particular style of puppet, the kind that we're working on at the moment for our production of A Christmas Carol. So we've built a frame out of cardboard and we're now going to cover it with papier-mâché. So you might notice if you watch the previous video, and hopefully you will have done to get to this point, that I've added in 2 extra strips across the top here. And they are just to give me something to put the paper onto so that I don't have a huge gap at the top to cover with the paper. So I just added a couple of those extra ones on there. And now I'm going to get started putting the paper onto this guy. I'm using this craft glue. This is PVA glue. You can use pretty much any PVA craft glue. Try not to use carpenters or trade PVA because it'll work, but sometimes it gives you a really weird colour and it won't dry in quite the same way as a craft PVA, which dries transparent, which is what you want, obviously. Then I've mixed it in a bowl. It's probably about, it's very difficult to say exactly because you want it to get to a consistency where you can easily spread it onto the paper, but it's probably, I don't know, about 1 part PVA to 1 part water, roughly, half and half. Antonia might disagree with me there. But really, what you want to be able to do is to spread it thinly over the paper and to have it sort of spread over very easily. If you just use the pure glue on its own, then it's far too sticky, so you need to water it down a little bit. The paper we're using, this is the paper that we've used since the very beginning. All you need really is something with a little bit of a grain to it, something that's not too thick, so that it bends easily and moves with the glue and will stick to the frame. And you can use newspaper. Certainly, if you're covering a balloon or you're doing something like that, you can use newspaper. The only trouble with newspaper, it's a little bit thin, so you'll probably find that you have to add at least a couple of layers in order for it to get to a decent strength. But with this sort of sugar paper, we find that 1 layer on each side is usually enough. So I'm going to get started at the top here. I'm just going to take a piece and I'm going to spread the glue onto it like so. So this is about the right consistency because it's fairly easy to spread that over there. And then I'm just going to pick a place to start and basically just start sort of putting these pieces on like so. There's really not, a huge amount that I can say about it in terms of technique. You just have to give it a try, get a feel for the paper, and just have a bit of a practice really, see how it comes out. As I kept saying with the frame, the nice thing about working with this stuff is that it doesn't matter too much if you make a little mistake, or if something comes out a little bit wobbly, or it doesn't look quite right in the beginning, because it's very, very easy to either cut pieces out if needs be, or to add pieces on afterwards. And I find that quite freeing. I find it quite a nice way to work because I know that it doesn't really matter too much if I make a mistake, so I don't worry so much about making them. And actually, because of that, I tend to find that I get better results. So just carrying on, getting a nice cover over the top here. This is the easy bit really. If I get too boring, I might speed some of this up so that you can see the results rather than just listening to me waffle about sticking the paper on. Go on there like so. So already there, you can see what we're going for. We're just trying to get a nice even cover to start us off all over the face. We have worn gloves in the past, or tried various things to kind of make less mess with the glue, or sort of to make it easier to, because obviously it's a bit tricky if you have to answer the phone or anything like that. But actually, really, the best way to do it is just to work with bare hands. Remember to take your rings off. And the PVA glue will of course come off very easily with hot water and soap. So it's really not a problem. I've got a towel there as well, because actually, if you've ever used it at school, one of the great things about it is that it dries in a fantastic way on your skin, so that you have all the pleasure of peeling it off, and it's very satisfying when you get a nice big bit to peel off. But you'll find if you need to clean your hands up quickly, that an old towel and a quick wipe is enough usually to mean you can at least open the door or answer the phone if you need to, if you haven't got the time to actually wash your hands with soap and water. So just working my way around the sort of simpler bits where the face is relatively flat. Size of the pieces doesn't particularly matter. You don't want them to be too big, because they do tend to wrinkle a bit if they're too big. But obviously you can just rip them according to the space that you've got to cover or the size that you need. And you will find that in certain places it won't curve quite right, or it'll stick up. But don't worry too much about that either, because you can just come along a few minutes later with another little piece and just stick that over the top to make sure that the little edges get pressed down. Now I'm only going to cover the front of this for now, because obviously it's going to have to dry before I can do the other side. But I will, once this is completely covered and dried, I will then flip it over and do the inside as well. And that's really crucial because of the way we stuck it together, and because, as I was saying, I only stick it together very roughly in order to hold the shape until I can put the paper on. You really do want to cover it on both sides in order to give it the strength that it's going to need to last. And for us, if we want them to last for a few shows, then we have to make sure that they're as strong as possible. This is already going nicely. I actually find the whole thing quite sort of meditative. It's quite a pleasant job to do. You're going to need some thinner bits to be able to get in and cover these spaces in the eyes. And although, to begin with, the eye sockets might not look too defined, or they might look a little too deep, for the time being I'm just going to try and get a first cover on them, and then if necessary we can always build them out afterwards and improve the shape a little bit. I try and go into the eye sockets on the angles as well, rather than just sticking paper in following the square edges, because it starts to soften the eye socket from the very beginning. If you just follow the square edges, then obviously the resulting socket is very square, whereas if you sort of try and push the paper over the corners, it starts to round them a little bit, and it just makes for less work when you then come to round them out all together in adding detail. So I'm going to try and put pieces in that just cover the corners like that. As I said at the beginning, this is a very particular technique for the puppets that we're making at the moment. Although we've used papier-mâché, this style of covering to make a lot of different puppets, we don't always build them in the same way. So the very first ones we made were actually made in a kind of very primary school sort of way, by covering a balloon and then popping the balloon and removing it, leaving you with a papier-mâché shell, a head shape which we then added features to. And we've also made them by creating masks of our own faces, using pieces of card and then sticking that all together and covering it with papier-mâché. But because the puppets for A Christmas Carol wanted to be, a little bit, some of them are more caricatured than others, it was easier to actually build them individual frames so you can get a sense of the shape of the head and make them quite different. As pretentious as it may sound, there's actually a lot to be said for getting the feel of the paper as well, whatever kind of paper you're using, because you begin to know what it can and can't do and how much you can bend it and what sort of size you need to tear it to in order to cover a particular place. And possibly trying out a few different papers too. I wonder if there's a market for, like the ASMR, is that right, the right term, stuff? The sort of, I guess it's I don't know, what would you call it? A trend? Or a particular style of video where people read things very quietly or speak very softly, or it's kind of like a white noise sort of thing, I guess. I don't really know much about it, as I'm revealing. I wonder whether there's a market for videos of just people just papier-mâchéing things quietly. Because like I said, I find it very, very relaxing, very meditative. "25 minutes of somebody just peacefully papier-mâchéing a puppet." So we've very nearly got an initial cover on this on the front. You can't go too far the first time or on the first covering, because when the paper's very wet, it adds a lot of weight to the card. So you'll find that if you try to turn it over, or if you try to bend it in a particular position, also because it wets the card very slightly as well, then the card will start to bend. And if it does that, then obviously it will dry in a position that you perhaps don't want it in. So you can end up with something that's a little bit misshapen. So really, it's safer to sort of hedge your bets, give it a basic cover, and have the patience to wait for it to dry. Provided, of course, that you haven't got a show the next day or something, which sometimes happens when we've had to repair them in the past. This stuff will dry very quickly if you leave them, if you've got a sunny day, which obviously we're not going to get so many of at the moment because we're sort of heading into autumn, winter. But if you've got a bit of sun, you put them out in the sun, it'll dry really quickly. They'll be good to go again in about 30 minutes or so, if you're lucky, so long as it's not too wet overall. And if not, then unfortunately they do take a little bit longer. Sadly, nothing does the job quite like the sun. So you can leave them by the radiator, or You can even try to use a hairdryer or stuff on them, but generally you'll find that if you can't put them in the sun, they're going to take probably overnight to be really properly dry enough to start working with again. I'm going to try and put a little bit around this nose here. For these fiddlier parts, not so much for your first covering, but certainly when you start to add more detail, it's often quite useful to have a pointy thing of some description. We tend to use cooking skewers. Obviously we don't then use them for cooking as well, but we have dedicated ones for puppet making, and they're really handy for just poking the paper in to awkward little places if you need to do that. So it's always worth having something that you can just, if you can't get your fingers in there, or you can't just nudge the paper into a little corner or somewhere where you want it to sit properly, it's handy to have, yeah, a little skewer or something like that to be able to poke them in there. This nose actually is not... I was a little bit worried it was going to be more awkward than it was. But actually it's cooperating fairly well. That's it. I'm going to put a couple of pieces on that overlap the front of the face and the inside of the jaw. And that's just to, again, to start to give it that strength and make sure the whole thing stays together when it's being used. So, I think with this guy, probably at about the point where we would stop and let that dry before we do anything else safely with it. We've got a basic first covering on it, so once that dry, that'll be pretty solid. We'll be able to flip it over and start to cover the inside. I wouldn't probably at this stage put anything onto the bottom jaw just yet, because you tend to have to move the head around quite a lot in order for that to work, and it can be quite awkward, which means that you might push in on some of the papier-mâché that you've already put on there. But if I pick this guy up, you might be able to see on that camera up there, but I'll try and show the camera at the front here. You can see already that he's started to take on a decent shape, like so. So thanks very much for watching. Excuse the noise, we've just, I think we've actually got someone, we've got a conker tree out there above, and it makes a lot of noise when it drops the stuff down on the roof. But I think at the moment someone's just sweeping all the conkers off the top. Sorry about that. So thanks for watching. If you've enjoyed it, leave a like, a comment, subscribe, hit the notification bell. All of that stuff helps us get the videos seen by more people, so that would be fantastic. If you've got any questions, please do leave them in the comments as well. We'll be happy to answer them. Otherwise, thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.